Right. Hello, hello.
See, that's
Okay,
thing. Yeah.
that works.
I'm sorry. My head's today. It's been a bit of an issue with the Zoom because no one has access to the recordings at the moment except for one person.
Okay.
But at least the recordings are there. They're not, then they're there. They're safe.
Mhm.
But we need to just be able to access them and upload them. And we talked already to the CNCF about it, but everything just takes a lot of time.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Let's use whatever we have now, and then we can improve. And that's why I really appreciate you sending the invites and everything, because I know that I will mess it up for sure. I would just do it in the wrong time zone, with the wrong links, with the wrong documents. I'm so bad at doing that. So
You know what? We will get there. It's going to
we will get
be
there.
we will mess up a lot of things. Like I messed up the invites for the general meeting for every single meeting for the tag. And the thing is, if you add them to the community calendar as a
Mhm.
recurring, it will add individual meetings. And then I had to
Delete them.
manually edit like 27 meetings or something. It is
That's
not,
that's that's a pain.
for the fact that the CNCF is like really like, cutting edge on a lot of technologies, the stuff that we have to work with
Calendars.
is just so shit. I don't understand
Calendars are not good. Calendars are complicated for sure.
that, but also like the schedule, the sketch, the
Mhm.
one for KubeCon, every single
Yeah.
time I'm so frustrated with it. Okay, all right. So let's hope that no one's going to the meeting now. I think I still am in that other meeting just in case. Oh yeah, wait, there's someone. Just one second.
I have
Um,
Ellie saying that he cannot join today, but I will update him later. What's going on with Thomas? I lost you, Leon. You mute yourself. Leon, you're still muted.
No, I am muted because I was talking in the Google Meet meeting to Ryan, just didn't
Okay,
know that he
good.
was in the wrong meeting. So
Yeah,
that
good.
was intentional. I'm just gonna
Perfect.
keep the other meeting open just in case someone comes in and I can just tell them, hey, you're in the wrong meeting. Okay, cool.
Mhm.
But now I think we're probably about the number of people that we're gonna be. So
Mhm.
I'm gonna just copy paste the docs, and then I think what would be great if Marisa, you start on giving us
Yep.
kind of the cliff notes on the charter and what we've been discussing.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. You have the links in the chat. Perfect. So, folks, if you can jump into the document, I think that Daniel already looked into that document. Ryan, I saw your comments, and Thomas, you saw the comments. Like I saw your comments too. So, I think that what we can do is we can quickly go over the document and then try to close some of the comments so we can invite more people. Like I know that there is a lot of other people that wants to join these meetings and go over the charter definitions. But what I was looking to do in this meeting is trying to align a bit between each other and see if we are in the same page or if we feel that there is something big missing from the current state of the document. So let me share that. And Lian, just for you to know, so we worked on this a bit and we kind of like collaborated there, but we left some comments open so we can just try to resolve those during the meeting today. Let me share, I will try to share my screen. Let's see, I have a bit of a mess in my desktop, but let's see if I can, not that one, of course, that's not the one. This is the one. Yeah, let's do this. Can you all see my screen?
Yep.
Yep. Good, good, good. Let me put this a bit bigger. Okay, so the first part, kind of like not important, but I kind of like created that initial list of topics that I think that this charter should be looking into. And I'm using that as a reference to see if we are covering kind of like in the charter definition, like the topics that I think that are relevant. And as you can see, we have comments from community people, and I've already merged some of the suggestions by Daniel and Thomas and some other folks into the list to make sure that, like things that are recurring, we just add, and things that are a little bit contentious or we are not 100% sure, we just leave us comments and then we just try to resolve in one of these meetings. Let's go to the current sections. I think that defining the personas that we are aiming to help with this charter, I think it's important. And so far, I think that I have two things listed here, developers and architects. I am curious to hear about if we think that we need to look into other personas too, right? Like, remember that these are the main target personas. It doesn't mean that we cannot talk about other personas too, but this should be kind of like the main focus most of the time. Any comments? Should we keep architects? Should we remove architects? I strongly believe that we should keep it, but like I'm not entirely sure what people think about that.
I think it makes sense to keep them.
Yeah.
So.
I'd also say personally I feel like we have this right now.
Mm-hmm. Good.
I think if we added other personas, we would start overlapping with like app delivery or other groups.
Mm-hmm. Good. Thomas, you have a comment here on target personas.
Yeah, I also agree on those two. My comment is more about maybe a secondary persona, or that depends really on how we collaborate with the other working groups and tags. So if we also cover if we plan to deliver some developer insights to other groups, to bring the developer perspective into the works of other groups, like, do we need a target persona for that? Is a platform engineer a target persona, as in the recipient of requirements from developers or wanted experience from developers, or is it something that doesn't make sense to target here specifically, and it's more about how we collaborate with other groups?
Let's make sure. So I will add here, but let's make sure that we add this into the collaboration section, right? Because if we add, a platform engineer here, then we will have a lot of overlap with the platform working group, and I think that will just cause like confusions. And let's be super explicit about like, okay, we will provide insights to platform engineers, but as a collaboration to another working group instead of being the main target persona of this group. What do you think about that?
Yeah, sounds good.
Other comments about that? Let's make a note about.
Yeah, maybe we want to just add to the target person that this is for developers that build for end users. So that is where we the strongest differ from platform engineers. Like, there's a lot of overlap, except that platform engineers build for other developers, and these developers do not.
End user applications. Perfect. I will just keep adding comments. I know that that's confusing sometimes, but like I will just work through the comments later on and just try to add into the text and in suggestion mode, and then we can just merge. Let me see. Do we have any other here? I'm not confident that I could guess why it's reading in this way. Does not, but does this include APIs? Including application services, infrastructure such as databases. I'm not confident that I could guess why it is reading in this way, but it does. Does this include APIs?
I will provide a bit of additional context. So Marsh has been trying to set up an API working group, or been trying to get their AIP working group find some space for it within the tag. Which is part of the reason why we started discussing this app development working group. So I think in this case, Marsh just wants to know, would that include APIs? If yes, if no, I think the wording should be explicit to either in or exclude APIs. That's probably what Marsh would like here.
What I would love to understand from this perspective is APIs to do what? Because again, it becomes all about like if they are like APIs for end users to consume, yes. If they are like APIs for teams and developer teams to consume, that's a different story. That's more platform related, right? So I think that it goes back to
argue, yes, both are good, right?
Both
because
are
it's
good.
API design is API design. I think I don't think he has a specific view on that. I think the original piece, the part of it that came out from from Google was targeted at both, but especially, I wouldn't say especially one or the other, but it had a lot of impact on end user. There's a lot of resource oriented APIs.
Perfect. So it's like best practices on how to create good APIs in general.
Yes, and a system for tracking those
API changes, yeah.
opinions. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds good. So let's include that. Okay. We will include APIs, but like for developers, not, well, yeah, developers and architects. Yeah.
Yeah.
Here. Yep. Best practices and tracking changes.
This is not super important right now, but at some point we might want to think about how our touch points with OpenAPI and how we are differing from this, so we're not like taking away work from them, or we just keep the scope clear.
Okay, the relationship with with standards.
The Open API Foundational Initiative or whatever it is. I'm not quite sure.
Yep, sounds good. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I don't think that we are trying to do something different from what this initiative is doing. But maybe we just can be a little bit more abstract in a way that we can recommend that or other, initiatives that are doing similar things.
Perfect.
Okay,
so it seems that
that's a very
part
good thing.
can be probably included in some following section around the goal and the focus. But here specifically, since the comment was here on the target persona, do we need to include APIs explicitly, like plan and design complex systems, including APIs, application services, and infrastructure? Was that I don't know, the meaning of that comment APIs here in the target persona also, and then we can expand on what about APIs later when we talk about the scope.
Perfect. Yeah, I just made that change. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I guess also the sub question in this was like, what do application services like, what does it mean? What does it cover? What does it not cover? That's what also reading out of the question.
Well, in part of this though is I feel like we're getting a little ahead talking about personas before the problem statement. So
that's good.
I feel like we need to understand the problem statement and then see if it matches up. Like if you define the problem statement different ways, you'll get different personas out of it.
Sounds good. Sounds good. That's a very good comment. Let me move that down then. So after the problem statement, I had the same thought at some point, and I don't know why I ended up pushing target personas to the first place. Maybe it will come back after we really review the problem statement, and then we push it up again.
Yeah.
But yeah, that makes total sense. Okay, so let's do that. So the problem statement, I think that we did a couple of drafts here with Daniel, and like we try to describe kind of like the main challenges that people is facing, mostly with our background coming from like the CNCF, looking at the landscape, working with developers, working with developer tools. We feel that like we have too many tools. They are like a big space for developers to learn a lot of different things, and depending on the organization, you are going to be pushed in some way to learn different technologies to be able to do your work. I think that we try to focus this mostly around Kubernetes, mostly because it's a working group around like CNCF. I don't think that we are limited by Kubernetes, but I'm using Kubernetes as the centerpiece for this, like the centerpiece for starting kind of like defining the discussion around it. So I start with a brief overview about like Kubernetes and containers and the fact that there are tons of tools to work, with if you are just planning to create containers in different languages. I think that the main reason to mention containers here and tools like Docker Compose is to make sure that the problem statement includes this scenario where, like developers can choose their tools, their programming languages, and the frameworks that they want to use to build their cloud native applications. And I strongly believe that this group shouldn't be so concerned about the tools that they choose, but we should be focusing into sharing best practices across different languages and tech stacks, and also sharing standards and promoting, the standards that are being kind of defined in this kind of like in this communities that we work with. I think that this introduction, if you have time, please read it carefully. And if the problem statement doesn't make any sense, at least like the introduction, feel free to add as many comments as you want. And I think that Thomas, you read this like a couple of days ago, right? I don't see any major point that you wanted to raise here, but I like, I'm guessing that you are okay with this description of the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I like it, so I didn't have specific comments or changes. Yeah.
I did
So
draft.
what,
for it.
this is helping me a bit understand what you mean by application development. And what I'm getting from this is that you're focused on Kubernetes developer experience, and specifically the infrastructure layer of what the developers need to think about. Because as a developer, you're saying like the things they have to learn, like I'd rather just use build packs, right?
Yep.
I don't want to care about containers or what have you, right? I
Mhm.
want to work with, and this is, I think the Kubernetes emphasis is it's good that that's clear, because cloud native development doesn't necessarily have to be Kubernetes.
Exactly.
So if you're looking at it from the lens, some of the things you're saying about, distributed systems and things like that, some of that has to do with how you develop applications and design distributed systems, irrespective of like the fact that it runs on containers or such like that. So I don't know if you want to maybe refine the charter to be explicit about what parts of, so what I see this almost as, this part of it at least, this is a section of the runtime, the developer runtime environment. So like if you look at a platform is going to have a runtime, right? And the platform runtime extends all the way up into like the development frameworks that people use to in their respective languages. And there's all sorts of layers with discovery and all of that. So I feel like you're focused on a fairly low level of the stack, which is fine, because that's where a lot of people are running into, cognitive load issues and all of that. But that's separate from saying, I need to build resilient applications that use patterns around, event sourcing, or, how do I use queuing or blob storage in my app? Like, how do I design applications to be cloud native that's beyond like, oh, I need to run a container and figure out how to get that running as smoothly as possible.
Yeah, I think that you're totally right. But like, I think that we also want to target some of that stuff as soon as it's in the Kubernetes space. That would be kind of like my definition. So we want to go into architecture, we want to go into distributed systems, but we want to make sure that we match those topics with projects that are like in the CNCF and like in the cloud native space. And most of the time, like the conversations will go towards Kubernetes because it becomes kind of like that in like cloud agnostic independent runtime for applications to run in. And I think that if you keep reading here, like the questions that I'm trying to specify here, just to drive the conversations, is how do we know that like developers in some way or another, they need to know what the runtime is, and how kind of like those details are leaked to developers for them to design their applications. I think that that's important, and there are tons of tools in that space to help developers to be more efficient with their decisions.
Okay, I accept
So-
it. I mean, I think the platforms working group has been able to do a lot of, and Thomas, I see you have your hand up, and I'll shut up in a
Yep.
sec. The platforms working group has been good about being neutral about Kubernetes, because platforms can extend well beyond Kubernetes, and not all cloud development will be on this specific runtime.
I think that sounds really good. Thomas, you go. And if you want to raise your hand, just interrupt me, because I'm not seeing, like the hand raised here.
Yes.
So go for it.
Yeah, I was wondering if it's something in between of those two, like perhaps, or well, definitely we don't want to focus, from what I hear, on the specifics of how to build applications. I guess that's too maybe out of scope, like how to build resilient application or secure application. That's really like too much focused on the details of application development, but perhaps we don't want to be too strict on Kubernetes either. I'm picturing some kind of bridge that we're trying to establish here between all those application development practices and platforms. So some kind of adapters, I don't know, adapters layer, something like that. So of course, maybe containers, build packs, it's great as a developer. I don't have to know how to build a container, but maybe not strictly for Kubernetes. It could be other cloud platforms that might accept containers as the like artifact format. So I like, of course, the focus of Kubernetes because there's a lot of tools that will work with Kubernetes, but I wonder if we want to be specific on Kubernetes or a bit more generic still with this focus of this like bridging between what developers do on their own specific stacks and what the platform that offers, but not necessarily hooked into all the Kubernetes infrastructure. Does that make sense?
I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think that yes, that's a good point. It's all about like which kind of like abstraction layers do we want to take in, right? You can say, okay, let's not do Kubernetes, or maybe let's be flexible about Kubernetes, but let's not be flexible about containers. And that just raise kind of like the abstraction to a different point, and then you can say, I don't care about containers. Let's talk about like purely about applications and what runs inside these containers, right? And I do believe that this working group should focus on that, on building resilient applications. How do you scale this up? Not the scale from the infrastructure point of view, but what developers needs to know in like when they are coding these applications for their applications to be good for their cloud native runtime, right? Like, and topics that comes to my mind is like, of course, like telemetry with open telemetry, maybe cloud events for event sourcing and building distributed applications that are heavily based on events, like looking into these standards and how these standards help developers to basically do their job when they are building applications that will run in runtimes like this. I'm totally okay with saying, well, okay, let's not heavily focus only on Kubernetes. Let's keep the door open, but let's make sure that we can like are in the same page with the topics that we want to cover. Does that make sense?
Yes, I just want to make a suggestion. So I feel like we are from the subject matter, we're kind of on the same page. It's more about the wording here. I would definitely suggest to remove Kubernetes, replace it maybe with cloud native. The question to me is, even if we're talking about stuff like serverless or something, in the end, everything's still running in a container, like on like really low level. So I think the point still stands that the developers must know their applications will run inside containers. That point stands no matter how you do cloud native nowadays. So I think that if we replace Kubernetes with cloud native workloads, we can keep the wording around containers and it will be fine, in my opinion. And then I do think that there is a big overlap, as I said before, with the platforms team, in as much that as they are trying to bring that whole idea of think like a developer, basically. Like when you're in the platform team, like basically you are a product developer now, which I would expect to have big overlap with this. However, I like that you put in the 12-factor principles, because that's something that is not very known, I guess, in the infrastructure world. So this is very like, how are we, as Thomas said before, how are we marrying classic developer principles that have existed for decades with cloud native principles? I think that is where I see this working group kind of like really be somewhere where no other working group is currently touching anything. So maybe if we focus on that or something, just an idea.
My main worry about that, and I think that that's the main reason why I added Kubernetes here, is because if we remove Kubernetes, we become too generic and too broad, right? So if you look at the 12-factor principles, right, like they do not talk about containers, but most of the principles aligns very, very well with containers, right? Like, so it becomes like if you want to apply 12-factor principles and you are using something like Docker or containers in general, you are kind of like 100% aligned with that idea. And then where do you run containers? Well, like a very standard and common way of doing that is with Kubernetes. If you say, okay, you can use container apps or, or Google Cloud Run or whatever just to run your containers, that's perfectly fine. but that becomes like vendor specific, and I'm not entirely sure that going there it's adding anything there, right? Like this is basically more like a generic way of saying, 12 factor principles, you do that with Docker, and if you want to run those things, well, you're just running something like Kubernetes. It doesn't need to be Kubernetes, but you need a runtime in a way.
Yeah.
But
I
think Daniel
I would
and David
argue,
have-
sorry, yeah.
Go.
No, go ahead. I was just gonna.
I would argue that you need to keep. I wasn't necessarily saying you need to be more generic and more abstracted. I just think you need to be upfront about what your focus is, because if you start a working group within the CNCF and you try and say that you're being more generic, but you end up only showing Kubernetes examples and approaching Kubernetes problems, that it would be somewhat of a disservice to people who are interested in the topic, and you're like trying to take on a topic that you can't properly represent. I don't agree that everything runs on containers and the runtime underneath, in the sense that I can upload a function and not care that
Lambda,
it's a container. Lambda without, you can upload a container as a Lambda, but you can also just directly upload a Lambda as code, right?
Exactly.
So I think saying that the whole cloud native moniker is broader than Kubernetes, and if you're clear about the fact that your container runtimes, majority of which are Kubernetes, I think that's a little more fair about like how you're representing it. And the stuff that we're talking about with the broader thing, I think you can get into that, but there's so much to solve at this level that, maybe that's a next generation of the working group, or when I've noticed the working groups tend to go cycle through, and they almost like they complete, because they're not the same as the rest of the projects. They can have they can exist in a domain that has a boundary to it. So is the first part like this raw developer experience and tooling, and as the second part maybe going into all of that higher level architecture stuff?
Yep, I think that's pretty fair. I think that's why the problem statement became a little bit longer, because we were trying to scope it down in a way just to make sure that we leave, like, we are just super clear from the beginning about what we are talking about. So I would like, David, I will appreciate like if you take a look at the text and maybe provide some suggestions on how do we make it more concrete. And then of course we will hear from other people too, like if they think that we need to be focused on Kubernetes or just making it more generic, or maybe start with a generic description and then saying, okay, but all the examples will be around this, which can be also like a good way to go. I'm not entirely sure now. I will keep thinking about this. But
Also, I just want to quickly say that Leon's point about how infrastructure people don't use software practices is still important. I don't know that it almost seems like it's disjoint, like you don't want to get into that with this group, but like, as Leon's saying, nobody's actually approaching it. So I'd love for that to come up somewhere.
Maybe in the collaboration.
Not in this doc, not in this working group. I just think it's an unmet need.
Yep, sounds good. Daniel?
I just wanted to echo David and Rian. I totally agree with that, because whenever I have some conversation with some Kubernetes or developers, as a part of the CNCF stuff, they are already looking forward to having more container and Kubernetes stuff rather than just general cloud, based on open source, of course. So we need to specify what is a remote environment and what is your targeting environment. Whenever we take recommend some of the open source tools, and then you're going to end up with deploying your application into some cloud, which is most likely Kubernetes. Without Kubernetes and container technology, I couldn't imagine that what kind of tools based on open source we can recommend, because this is a really market trend and then demand stuff. So we can provide or recommend more broad and general stuff, but my concern is the readers, maybe they are not interested anymore. So I don't want to 100% focus on Kubernetes, but we need to specify some targeting stuff here, and then we're gonna narrow down the application runtime along with that target environment. Go ahead, Thomas.
Yeah, so just a thought, and maybe yeah, also what Leon said, it feels like we're on the same page. Maybe it's just about wording, and that's one of the most difficult things, right? Getting the terms with the definitions we all agree, and making sure we are meaning the same thing. So I was thinking about what the platform working group is working on, and all these ideas that Kubernetes is not the end platform, like a platform for building platforms. So platform teams then work on top of Kubernetes to provide some experiences to developers. So maybe just an input for also how we represent this here, that we are not going directly to Kubernetes, but somehow it would be nice to represent that there's a platform in between. So if we talk about cloud native runtimes as provided by the platforms in the sense of what the platforms working group is working on, maybe we can like define it by also referencing the definitions that the platforms working group have published,
I got
rather
one
than
question,
directly
Thomas.
on Kubernetes.
Yeah, I got one
Sorry?
question, Thomas. I never ever joined the platform engineering working group before, so just wondering which project they actually putting the most effort into their working group as part
So
of the CNCF
it's not project oriented. It is principles and practices. So that's why there's a white paper, that's why there's a maturity model. We're not actually focused on any specific project. Like the next
Okay.
thing we're looking at is the practices around platform as a product and
So
product thinking.
targeting audience should be platform engineers.
Platform engineers, platform builders. I actually think it's more, it is platform engineers, but it's also like platform directors and people who need to think about building a product for others, which includes platform engineers. But I almost think the stuff that Leon brought up is like, we almost need like a more specific platform engineering practices. Like, how do you do testing? How do you do software releases? How do you do versioning? How do you do
I think,
dependencies? You know,
David,
Okay,
I think that this group, that's kind of like should be kind of like one of the main goals. I think that we need to go to the goals section later, but like the idea here is to just surface all these topics, right? Like how developers are doing testing nowadays and the tools that are in that space. So platform engineering teams kind of like become aware of the practices and the tools that people is using. And I think that that's where the collaboration might happen, right? Like we can just come and say, okay, you know, like developers are interested in these three things, and the like based on the information that we can gather about developers, they are using these tools in these ways for doing these things. How does that map to the work that the platform working group is doing and the recommendations that they are giving, to people, and around practices and just taking in some of these, developer practices into consideration when you kind of define platforms. But at
felt
the
like
same
someone
time,
was trying to say something before. Was
go for it.
Leon?
Yeah. Nope.
I thought
Me?
someone
No,
else.
David, you go first.
Well, I think one of the primary problems that we have in platform engineering, and it's not about the tools, it's about simply the practices and some of the barriers that the tool set that they're working with present. So if you want to do unit testing as a platform engineer, you're going to use a very different set of tools, and it's just much more difficult because you're working, it's like you can only work with a distributed system at any given time. So you need these, and doing unit testing with declarative tools like Terraform itself is, again, awkward. So I don't know that this in particular is I've been trying to do this for a long time, trying to get platform people to behave more like software engineers, and it's hard because they work differently. And I wouldn't say that they can't, but the challenges aren't quite the same as a feature developer on an end user facing product.
That's why I think that we should first target like feature developers now.
Yeah.
And then look into collaborations.
Hey, David, that is a really good point. I just wondering, so you're going to be more focused on practices for platform engineering, and then you guys actually give some example. So how do you do do that practice, we do some tools. You mentioned that you're not gonna focus on tools or project, only more focus on practices. And then, okay, here are just some practice how to do like a unit test, and then any like a more
I think
tangible
you
example. Yeah.
it's a good point, and there is some demand for more technical content
Yeah.
within the working group. I think one of the risks that I see, and maybe others, is that if we show a technical example, does that immediately become a an endorsement of a specific project and a very specific way of doing things, right?
Yeah.
That's
I
how a lot
gotcha.
of CNCF stuff gets interpreted, is like you asked which project are we aligned with, right? So that I think we should do that, but we also need to figure out, maybe it's like, every cloud provider who shows it, like, they have the tabs for the different languages. Maybe whenever we present something like unit testing, we say, here's a couple of ways of doing it, instead of making it about a specific project or framework or something like that. Here's the mindset you have to be in if you have to unit test creating an S3 bucket or a particular kind of infrastructure deployment.
That's
Yeah,
for
I think,
platforms.
yeah, you're right. So the reason why I ask that, I mean, just more thinking about from developer standpoint. So whenever we showcases some of the practices, and developer always they ask the following question: okay, how to incorporate that kind of practice into my local environment? So what kind of tool I need to use? Then can I use that practice on my like ID tool, like IntelliJ or some of the stuff? So developer always try to realize that kind of stuff along with their daily job, which is application development. Maybe some different nature of people, but yeah, I got your point. Yeah,
And that's also,
why
you're also speaking somewhat to the gray area between application developers and platform engineers / developers. Like, where is the shared responsibility model overlap? Like, if a developer needs a bucket, how are they, or they need to interact with a bucket, how do they do that locally? And how does that translate to when they deploy? Like, who creates the bucket? How do I interact with the bucket when it's deployed? So I think, in a simple way, maybe part of what this group does is like discuss with the platform group, like, where's the shared responsibility model that will lead to effective flow, right, between local environment, deployment environment.
I think that that's kind of like the main reason for the next diagram and where the conversation goes, kind of like in the problem statement. I don't think that we should like go deeper into the mechanisms on how these work, but try to document kind of like what we see people doing, right? People working only locally, like developers that are focused only on local development, developers that focus like working against remote environments, and developers that basically work on a completely remote environment, and everything is kind of like remote. And I think that again, like trying to describe the challenges that people face and the tools that they are using. I'm really pro tools in these kind of conversations. I want to talk about like things that people is using, like real tools that they use, and also because we are kind of like in the CNCF space, I think that like having some kind of like mapping or like landscape about the tools and the different phases in kind of like the kind of things that developers do makes kind of like a lot of sense. I think that will help a lot to clarify and maybe open kind of like these new bridges with other teams and collaborations to figure out which tool to use for what, without like saying, we want to endorse this tool because we feel that that tool is the best.
So Mauricio,
I have a question. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so
I just have a question here. Is there anyone in this call who is an actual application developer?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. Okay. Good. Just checking.
Yeah, I think that, like, for example, my connection with Daniel is he has a lot of interactions with real developers and he does a lot of developer stuff itself. So he has a broad view of tooling. The same with Thomas. That's, I think, that the main reason why we keep talking about this. And I think that we are pretty in alignment. That's why I'm really curious about like the perspective of people not coming from that background, and maybe people that it's not in contact all the time with like developers using developer tools, because my experience in the CNCF going as a developer is that, well, you have a lot of people talking about tons of different tools, but when I look at the tools that I use to develop apps, probably none of those tools that they are mentioning to me are relevant to my day-to-day work. And
It's
I
all
think
YAML. I don't work
Exactly.
in YAML.
The
Yeah.
reason why I'm asking is because we've been, again, the overlap with platforms, with the platforms working group. The platforms working group are people who want to enable developers, and this
Mhm.
working group should be coming from the other side, right? This should be a
What
group
they
of
want to be enabled
mainly
by.
application developers who might not be super familiar with cloud native principles. That would be actually probably something good, to be
Mhm.
honest,
Mhm.
to talk about best practices and from their perspective. Like as a developer who is not very familiar with Kubernetes or containers or whatever, what do I need in terms of like support, tooling, tutorials, best practice, whatever, to write applications that will work, that will run, and I don't have to actually become a DevOps person. That is what I really would like this working group to kind of like focus on, and would like that to be reflected in the charter. Thomas, go
Perfect.
ahead.
Yeah, sounded good. Hey, Marcio, can you go up the diagram, the local and remote stuff? I really like this
Thomas, please
diagram.
say what you wanted to say, because you've been having your hand up for like ever.
Oh, yeah, sorry about
Yes, now I don't remember what I wanted to say. Oh, yeah, so maybe it was, yeah, okay. I think I had two things. So one was the interesting discussion about like the bucket example. So I'm a developer, I need a S3 bucket. What do I do locally and how do I get one in production? And then no, I think I left a couple of comments and suggestions regarding the wordings to make sure like to have more focus on the development workflows. I guess the tag app delivery already deals with a lot of the tools for doing deployment. The platform
Provisioning.
working group also is defining the way that then platform provides APIs to get those services on the target deployment environment. I feel like the part that's usually not much covered is the local development workflows. Now, they could be fully running locally, or there could be a remote counterpart on that. But I feel like that's the part where probably we are missing more the coverage, because if we go more on the platform providing services, that's a lot of what then platform engineers need to work and provide through platform APIs to enable application development teams. But how about all the development workflows before we do the Git push? What happens? How can I do testing locally if I consume APIs through CNCF projects like Open Feature to get feature flags, or Dapper or Open Telemetry? Like as a developer, what do I need to know? How to get a good experience using these polyglot tools? And then, of course, there will be some corresponding work done by the platform to support that, to get to production. But I feel like, I don't know a good way to make clear that distinction. Also in the infrastructure architecture, like mentioning Kubernetes directly, I might not run Kubernetes locally as a developer. Hopefully I'm not running Kubernetes locally as a developer. I'm just working towards APIs that then can be implemented on top of Kubernetes by the platform, or maybe not even that, like Cloud Run. I can use Knative APIs, but it's not Knative under the hood. Like there could be different things. I could use build packs also on platforms that don't implement that as Kubernetes. So I see value in, of course, we want to be specific so that then we have the right points of contact with the other groups, and we want to be CNCF specific, of course, but also to have, to not scare developers. Like if we show directly Kubernetes and all the infrastructure layers and virtual machines, I feel like it might give the wrong idea about the focus of the group. Maybe like we hope that all that part is covered by the platform, right? I guess the point is what is on top of that.
I think that mention this, maybe we can replace this by like a platform, like a runtime, basically. I don't think, like, I think that this is part of the problem statement only. This is not part of the solution, right? So I think that we are just describing here the state of the world, how complex it is, and we are using Kubernetes as an example, maybe, that we can just refine later on and make sure that, for example, here, I'm not concerned about how that remote environment gets provisioned, but I'm concerned about what you were saying, Thomas, about like the developer, flows. What is the developer doing in these kind of scenarios, right? Like not explicitly how to get access to this, or who gives you credentials, or who provision this, which might be the platform team, but what the developer is in charge when working in these kind of scenarios. And that's why I think that we can like arrive into the problem statement of this kind of list of what do we want to do, what do we want to talk about. And I think that this is kind of like a core thing that we will need to refine over and over, right? Like, what are the things that developers are using? What are the topics that developers care about? And how can like different tools help developers in that space? Tools and standards or initiatives. And I think that we should definitely focus on trying to get this list as close as possible to the focus of the working group.
Sounds good to me.
Good.
Yeah, sounds good.
I can see here Marsh adding kind of like APIs all over the place, which is great. And I think that this makes total sense, right? Like APIs and tools like SDKs, CLIs. Yeah, perfect.
I wonder if the exact categories could be one of the first deliveries of this group. Let's formalize the main buckets of categories, like instead of having a fixed list here, but just mentioning some as examples, but then have maybe one of the first works done here, defining those categories that will, I guess, represent also the landscape that is also mentioned in the goals.
Yeah, so that's kind of like goals and deliverables, and I think that this.
Yeah, I wouldn't lock the categories in the in the charter. I guess that's an area where, it might be worth having different perspectives and discussions around how to categorize these tools and these patterns.
Makes sense. I think that following kind of like what David suggested at the beginning, like target personas, okay, based on the problem statement, then goals, and then what are we planning to deliver if these goals are exactly what the group wants to focus in, right? Again, there are tons of things here. I think that we need to sit down and refine. What I'm usually worried when I see these working groups, and it happened the same to me with the platform group, is that it's pretty broad, right? We can do tons of different things, but we have limited time and limited people working on these things. So we need to be super concrete about the deliverables. And as you mentioned, Thomas, right? Like I strongly believe that a glossary and a landscape might be kind of like the first two things that we can actually work on. And that will derive in some white papers, but I have the strong feeling that this working group will not be, I don't know, like it will be a different dynamic than the platform working group, where the topics are not that well defined, in my opinion, right? Like platform engineering, at least in the CNCF space, it's pretty new. So there were a lot of discussions about what does it mean, what do we do, but on the developer side of things, we know what unit testing is, we know what integration testing is, we know what feature flags are. So it's much easier to just get kind of like references to other definitions instead of creating our own definitions of things. What is not as easy is to create like some kind of like landscape to show, okay, this tool, when you're in this phase, will help you with these very specific things that will save you time, or it will increase productivity, or it will help your teams to achieve certain things that today you're struggling with. Do we have any strong opinions about that? Like, I mean, David, again, if you can take a look at the goals, guys, if you can, take a look at the goals again and just check and see if we are just overlapping with stuff or we want to remove things. My strong feeling is that on the deliverable side of things, this is high priority. The other things we need to step down and be more concrete with what we are planning to work on. I don't know, you guys, how much time do you have in your agendas? But I know that we're all busy people, so we need to try not to overcommit to deliver a lot of stuff. And we need to start thinking about like how much time can we work on these kind of things to define kind of like.
So do you have a expected time frame to accomplish this kind of deliverables?
Let's talk with Lian about that. Lian, I don't know, like your experience from the platform group. What kind
There's
of like...
no there's no set time frame for you. What we expect from working groups is that they have a goal. So it's not enough to just say, we'll just talk about this topic forever. So we expect working groups to have some idea of some outcomes at some point, right?
Yeah.
And then we would expect, so what we're gonna do is set up a regular meeting, create probably, I don't know when we're gonna do this, but we wanna elect chairs fairly soon, so we have someone responsible, and we can like start on the actual operations of it. So we from tech leadership also can see like, is this working group actually going somewhere? Are they actually gonna work on something that will, you know, yield some value at the end, or do they need more guidance? And then from our experience, this will just happen naturally, that the working groups themselves will set themselves goals. And if they see like they can't reach it, then they will just usually then dissipate again. So I wouldn't be too focused on that, on time frame for the moment, but rather really zero in on one thing for now. It could be just, let's just discuss, you know, like what we actually want to do for now. Like again, the scope tends to get bigger over time, so maybe it's more helpful for you to be more focused and specific in the beginning, and then add more stuff on while you're having conversations, and you see like you have these discussions around an actual deliverable that you then see, okay, we have to expand the scope a little bit. Yeah, because if I remember correctly, like you can always change the charter with, I think you need the supermajority of your own chairs, and then of the liaison for the tech leadership, which is me. So it's not like, if you want to change things in the charter later, it's not a huge deal to do it. So don't feel like you have to have everything set up perfectly right now. It should be clear enough, but it doesn't need to be like future-proof forever.
Perfect. So, Lian, let me ask you, with what you are seeing now, I mean, we will keep refining, of course. And I think that for me, one of my, at least my dreams would be to have enough for example, for Salt Lake City to be able to maybe present kind of like in the Tag App Delivery meeting, just to make sure that we do some work, we create some momentum in the group, and we find people that is interested in these topics, so we can just gather more people when we go to the US, and just make it grow a little bit more. Also, I believe that these kind of topics that like people will have completely different opinions on exactly the same topic. So I am really keen to find more and more people to join the discussion. So for me, it's
I mean,
all about
we'll
like
get the working
refining and
group
getting started.
running until Salt Lake City East. That's not. I'm not worried about that. So Ryan, you had your hand up as well.
Yeah. Oh, I wanted to make a suggestion about the goals and deliverables, and maybe a way to prioritize is just like, maybe we could all kind of comment and indicate which ones we think are the highest priority, and hopefully that leads us to kind of a smaller set. Like if this group did one or two things, what would we say are the most important things? Rather than kind of like we've done the part where we've kind of gathered, here are all the ideas that we think are good. Now, like which of those ideas do we think are the most important? And it doesn't have to be like a vote. Like we might decide, hey, there's something that one person feels really strongly about, and they're also willing to take the lead on it. So it's kind of like free, it's kind of free money, right? If we all think it's a good idea. Because we have to think about, like, there's work we all want done, and then there's people that are going to do the work. We need to align them.
Yeah. I like the idea of picking kind of like top three, kind of like saying, okay, these are the top three things that we are interested in, and then these are the things that we believe that we can deliver, and then just prioritize and said, okay, this is the one that it's most likely that we can deliver in a finite amount of time, and we're gonna just not be there working forever until we get that done. So yeah, definitely let's do that. I will try to do. Yeah, go for it.
So just really quickly, I really like the idea. I agree. And perhaps a suggestion based on that, if we could maybe set up a different document where we gather all the other ideas and keep the charter very focused. so that it's clear that those are, I don't know, the 2 goals with the 2 deliverables. I know that in the platforms working group, like I joined the work around the platforms white paper, and for me the experience of like joining the group and starting working on it was quite nice and simple because it was very focused. So I knew, okay, so that's the focus, that's the goal, and I'm thinking about how to get people to join, because of course there's a lot of interesting points already. The conversation is the document show that, and it's really exciting. I'm looking forward to address a lot of this, but it's a lot. So how to keep this focus, I think, will also mean getting better and more focused contributions from other people, because then they have the right expectations that will be the focus, even though there are probably so many other topics that might be worth discussing. But just for starting, then perhaps if it's possible, we can extend the goals and bring more things in the future. But just to see how it goes, have a couple of goals, a couple of deliverables, and build on top of that and iterating through it. What do you think?
Yeah, sounds really good. Sounds really good. I think that we should do that, just to not lose some good ideas that we have in this document and that are relevant for some people for sure. And then we just decide on which ones the group might want to tackle first. Let's do that. And before we finish, because it's like we are on the top of the hour, I need to jump to another meeting. But Lian, do you think that we should set up kind of like weekly meetings or bi-weekly meetings?
I think every 2 weeks.
Yeah,
So
bi-weekly
other
meeting,
the work
very
groups
good.
that do every 2 weeks, obviously, if you feel like you want another meeting just to discuss charter, you can do it anytime. I will create, I don't know what the process is, if I should create one for the community meeting already. Let me do this. I will just create another meeting inviting the same people for 2 weeks, in 2 weeks on the same time. We can change it.
Okay.
It's fine if we want it differently. But I'm just going to create one for in the next 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, sorry. I will talk to the other tag leaders to see, like, timeline wise, when do we have to elect chairs and all, like, the the housekeeping things. And then I will come back with that information for the next meeting, and then we will know if we have to, like, set everything up in the CNCF stuff, blah blah. But this discussion on a charter, it can go on for a little bit longer. Obviously, we don't have to have everything ready in 2 weeks.
Perfect. That sounds good. But I think that we have the opportunity to refine this, and I would love to just make it a little bit more open next time, just for more people to join. Basically, I'm really curious for all the people that it's not in the same page when they read this. I want to see kind of like how they react and what topics do they mention that we're not covering.
Yeah, cool. Let's do
Thank
that. Cool. Thanks for driving this. And I'm
Thank
really
you, folks.
excited. This is looking really good.
Awesome.
Right. Speak
Thank
to you
you.
soon.
Have a great day. Bye.
You too. Bye.